from Bugeye Guys, and this is a video about nose fit. So I wanted to just talk to you a little about one of the more common challenges that we face, especially in the restoration world with regard to Bugeye Sprites. These cars have all been hit in the front, and it doesn't matter how perfect your Sprite is, but you're going to find that at some point somebody parked it parallel parking, perhaps in the 50s or 60s, and it got tapped. It doesn't take much, but it's just such a vulnerable car. And remember, it was an $1,800 car. It didn't get the love and respect that they get now, although people love them. They just didn't have as much invested. So it was not a disposable sports car, but it was a cheap sports car. And they inevitably got tapped. And when they did, what happened almost universally was that they flared out in this wheel arch. So what you're looking at here looks pretty nasty, but it's actually a very wonderful car that we're starting to restore. And in the process of that restoration, we're doing all of the work that we can to ensure that the final painted product is spectacular. And one of the first steps is to deal with the impact result. When you get a forward hit, you get a flare outward at this wheel arch. And what we've done is we've welded this up, and we've also put a piece of rod. It starts right here and it terminates down here. That piece of reinforcing rod is welded into the shelf of the nose. We'll see if we can see that better when I open the hood for you. And we've melted the paint because the paint's all going to get blasted off anyway when this car is media blasted and then reprimed. So we're basically starting over, and we have a chance to do all that before we even take the car apart. And that's something I wanted to invite you to be thinking about if you're thinking of restoring one of these cars. The other thing that we have a great opportunity to do is to address these gap issues. And you can see here there's a widening gap. And I can't get my finger to slide further up, but it's wider at the bottom. Hopefully you can see that in the video. And in order to do that, unfortunately, we start to work on all these other gaps. We can't actually lift the back of the nose to close that gap. So this is going to have to be addressed with some welding on the A-pillar to actually bring the A-pillar forward slightly. And that's a common fix to rescue that kind of issue. And then over here we have side gap issues. So we're going to want to do some more work to shape this so that it's perfectly parallel to the rocker panel. Because as these things get hit and it flares out here, you also get wing flare out at the leading edge of these noses. And all of this is being addressed now. The other thing that we have on this car is a seam right here. And that seam, you should be able to see it, is from throwing the nose up, hyperextending the nose, if you will, and levering the hinge right here to create this divot. Now that can be, again, repaired when the bodywork starts, but what we first needed to do is make sure we got this seam. I'm sorry I couldn't show it to you before we started. It's dramatically better than it was. But part of that hyperextension caused the nose to actually flatten and lift on the edges. So you have this repetitive motion here, and what's sort of happening is the nose is going upward here, and that's why you end up with kind of a high spot right here. So the nose needs to be arced back down. We need to basically support it in the middle in a properly radius, and we might even snip the trailing edge to, in a sense, bring that contour of the nose back to the contour of the cowl. And all of this is part of your pre-restoration regimen before you even begin to take apart your Bugeye that you're going to restore. If we look on this side, you can see that issue of flare in the front. It's a little bit over bite here and under bite here, and we're going to need to shape that. Now, one thing that's interesting as well about this project, you see the gap on the passenger side is actually pretty excellent. But we turned this into a flip forward nose, which is another part of this restoration, was to convert it because we believe that in our marketplace, these super sprites that are high-end restorations, they really need easier nose liftability, easier engine access. We have, unfortunately, an aging demographic, and so, or fortunately for that matter, but lifting the nose from here and flipping it forward is a much more practical and user-friendly way to build these. It also, if you need to work on the engine, it's just a delight. And moving underneath the hood on this car, well, you can take a quick look at this really nice 1275 engine that we'll recycle on the build once we get the bodywork all restored and repainted. But these are the X braces that we've added. Now, when you do this, you end up with a much more rigid nose. Without the X brace, you really would see a lot of flex, and it makes it much harder to control how precisely the nose arcs back into position, and hard to control. It's much easier to control the ultimate parking space of the nose when it's at rest. So there are all of those X braces, and then you should be able to see around the fender, there is that reinforcing rod on this shelf. It's a little difficult to tell. Let's see if you can see it on this side. The shelf here makes a perfect nest. You can put your round stock right in there, and we TIG welded into place to get it precisely mated with the contour. And again, all of this now will get media blasted. You just want to be careful that this area here often separates from the nose, and those X braces will help to reinforce that. Here's another chronic challenge. A lot of these hinge pads will pull away from the nose, and it just depends on the car that you have and how it's been hit in the past or how it's been maintained. But the flip forward option allows you to bypass this mounting area, which is often losing its rigidity. So if you want a flip forward kit, we have all this in our catalog here at Bugeye Guys.